Okay, welcome back everyone to the County and Regional Government Study Committee on Monday, the 21st of October. We're going to jump right in with Charlie Baker from the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission, who's joining us from a conference somewhere else in the country. So he doesn't have that much time, and we want to just make sure he gets the chance to tell us. What I asked him about is last time the whole conversation about intermunicipal agreements came up and what you can and cannot do with them. And I can't remember, it might've been Chris, but somebody said we should talk to Charlie Baker. He has some direct experience with how they work or don't work. And then Charlie sent me this awesome memo that was used to sort of evaluate the options, which I believe is that posted, Mike? Is posted on our website. So if anybody wants to look at that, and I will turn it over to you, Charlie, and you can tell us what you think we should know.
Thank you. And Mike, I think you offered to maybe share that memo. I probably will reference it a little bit and with some apologies. So this is obviously not a polished presentation, but more I'll call it planting seeds in the committee. And so in this memo that you all got, I was going to start on page 3 and really just talk about the different models that are available to municipalities currently in Vermont to work together, which is a challenge. So on page 3 of that memo, and sorry, does everybody have it? I just want to make sure. Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Do you want us to have it on the screen? Because then we can't see you as much, but.
Well, probably the words are more important than me. So,
can everybody bring it up on their screen? Okay, now that's better. Now we can sort of see it, but we also have it up on our screens.
Yeah, and if you could scroll to the next page. Sorry, I'm realizing there's 2 page 3s. So here, when we were working on setting up a regional dispatch structure and looking at the statutory options, we came up with these 3 primary options initially. Intermunicipal contracting, so municipalities contracting with each other, and there's also it's not a long-term countywide solution. If we had been going, this was with 6 or 7 towns, obviously there'd be one town that owned the operation and the other 6 would be contracting with that one. It's a possibility, but one that the group that was working on this didn't prefer. And just to be honest with you and frank, right, like there's different power dynamics when one municipality has outsized control of the service and the contracting municipalities have less control. So that was one option.
Charlie, could you back up for just a second and tell the committee what it was you were trying to do and why you were looking at these?
Yeah, so for the last 55 years, I don't want to go all the way back, but
don't back up that far.
Yeah, no joke. Since 1968, municipalities, at least in Chittenden County, have been talking about the possibility of sharing dispatch services. So right now, and you're probably a little familiar with 911, right? You call 911. And at this point in time, right, the state police would answer in the Williston barracks, and then they would determine where that call needed to go to. Oh, it's a police call in Burlington, or it's a fire call in South Burlington, and they would transfer those 911 calls to the local dispatcher in those municipalities. And so we really had a system that had 911 dispatchers at the state, and then local municipal government employees that were local dispatchers for their local emergency services, police, fire, ambulance, right? And they were all having, and still have, trouble maintaining staff. They're all marginally staffed in that, you need like 6 people to just be able to do a 24/7 shift. And so anyway, this was the issue that we were trying to address. Was we wouldn't be better if we could have a regional dispatching system combine the staffs together, give more opportunities to the employees. In other words, there'd be the dispatchers, there'd be supervisors, there'd be a manager, there'd be more training, more consistency. So there was really a lot of interest in improving that service. And long story short, in the end, it didn't really work, and it was really about the capital funding that was needed to get this off the ground was a barrier that couldn't be crossed. But the issue of how municipalities work together was, in my mind, contributing to that and making it somewhat overly difficult to work together. So these are the options that were explored. The contracting option I just talked about. The next one, in somewhere in the late teens, the 20 teens, we got a shared services option for the RPCs. Mike, if you could scroll up for that next bullet. Yeah, RPC shared services. And so that was one option. And then we could create a special purpose government, kind of like what they did in Central Vermont. But you got to have voter approval. And actually, I'm going to turn to the next page, because after we look at those first three, and at the top of the next page, Mike, is a list of 5. So then we kind of even expanded that a little bit further, and looked at intermunicipal service agreement with CCRPC. So this is kind of the regional shared services idea that's in legislation. And so there's these 5: a not-for-profit that the RPC would run, a not-for-profit the municipalities would run, an interlocal police services organization, or a union municipal district. And so I'll kind of review these 5 options in a little bit more detail. And as you scroll down here, number 1, this intermunicipal services agreement, you can see we kind of went through a little bit of discussion, benefits and drawbacks. And primarily, this is a little bit messy of a statutorily authorized model. It does, require all the towns to work together. But again, we had a situation where only 7 of the towns wanted to do this service. And the dynamics of having like the full board of the RPC be a partner in it didn't feel right to those municipalities. And so ultimately they, kind of said this didn't look like a real great option. There's also issues as you read down these bullets and the drawbacks. It wouldn't have governmental immunity like municipality does when they're providing public safety services. And, we need a way to kind of really make sure the finances were kept separate. Doesn't have the authority to adopt ordinances. So those were kind of some of the primary issues with that model. So we moved on from that model. Then we looked at a nonprofit model, number 2. Mike, if you could scroll up. This was, actually creating a new nonprofit. We could do that and I'm sorry, I'm reading along here with you. You could do that pretty easily. And you could have the RP or the municipalities could appoint members to be on that board. But then at that point, you start to get a little separated from the municipal governments. So, and again, it doesn't have the liability protections. It's not owned by the government. It's kind of a separate entity. And there was even a concern that this model isn't really specifically authorized, even though there's been some use of this kind of model for fire and rescue services. So we moved off that one. Then we moved to a nonprofit formed by the municipalities. And again, not a total clarity on legislative direction here. But again, it's not owned by the governments, but has its own board of directors whenever you set up a nonprofit. And yeah, not clearly authorized in statute. So again, I think we moved off the nonprofit just from a liability, statutory concerns. And then the interlocal police services organization. This is something that could be done fairly easily. Sorry, I'm moving on to the drawbacks page up at the top of the next page. In this case, it would have all the employees would still work for their own municipality, but so that got just very complicated because we're dealing with unionized environments here. And so that was kind of walked away from, and really ended up, we left with what was left was forming the Union Municipal District. This has been the primary model from my experience that our municipalities use to work together. It's how our municipalities have formed our solid waste district. We have a multi-town water district in Chittenden County. And I think maybe our transit agency is unique, but our transit agency is a Union Municipal District. I'm not sure if some of them around the state might be the same or might be nonprofits, but this also, this is a very challenging process to go through. It does create a new local government, and it required going to the voters in every town. So town meeting day, I think March 2018, I think we actually did do this, and I think 6 of the 7 towns voted to join. And so we did set this up, but then just operationally, it was still, there's nobody who owns it to kind of get it started. And so we had a public safety authority that was formed, and over many months of trying to work together and working on the details of it, it just did not work. It certainly wasn't easy to use this form of regional governance to move service forward. So anyway, I will stop there. That was my quick intro of these different options. And when Senator Hardy contacted me, I just was reminded that we had at least reviewed the options that were available in statute, and maybe even a couple that weren't available in statute, to think about how towns can work together. And we produced this memo. And I probably should have started off with a little bit of background about myself. I've been in Vermont for 16 years. Prior to doing that, I ran a large department in a county in Delaware, and I worked in a county in New Jersey at an earlier point in my career. So a little familiar, and 3 regional governments. So a little familiar with county and regional government, and happy to answer any questions on this or wherever you want to take it. Happy to go there. And if you do want to know more about the Public Safety Authority, probably it would be good to have a couple town managers like Jesse Baker and Aaron Frank in, who were, I would call them the couple primary leaders of that effort.
Okay, great. Thank you, Charlie.
That was a lot all at once.
No, that's okay. And just to remind everybody, the current status of this is that it didn't actually get off the ground. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yeah, we have a legal public safety authority, but actually, doing the final things of putting the money together into their budget and starting up dispatch has not happened. And frankly, I think it's a little bit more of an incremental approach that's being tried now. South Burlington is going to kind of staff up, and then we'll end up in kind of a contracting situation, I think. Maybe one town will contract with them. And it's still pretty messy. I don't think we're providing the best services to the public in that model that has been existing for over 50 years. And it's a reason that we, every few years, for the last 55 years, we talk about changing it again.
Yeah, and you're not alone. I mean, as Senator Norris and I know very well, we spent 5 months talking about dispatch pretty much in the Senate Government Operations Committee, and what resulted was now, I think, a 2-year study about dispatch. They're coming out with their second report, I believe, in December. So it's a statewide problem, but one that could potentially be solved a little cleaner if we had some kind of functional regional government solution. Do people have questions? Yeah, Julia. Sorry, Rep. Andrews.
Thank you, Charlie. I had a question about for structures where you had mentioned there there didn't seem to be somebody in charge of them. They're all just like everybody's an equal member. What are the barriers to creating a position to put somebody in charge in those instances? Is it financial? Is it like, you know, they're going to be a hard person to find? Like, what are the barriers?
And I think it has much more to do with the power dynamics. And, you know, from what I've seen and heard about in my own county here, you know, there just always ends up being dynamics that start making it break down when one town is taking the lead because that's what needs to be done to move it. And, you know, so I guess Representative Andrews, if I was going to, you know, push the subject a little bit more, you know, and actually, like we just formed a new municipality with the Communications Union District, right? That's another version of this. And without my staff having spent a lot of time on that, that would not have gotten off the ground. And you know, so when I look back, I'm like, geez, maybe we should have taken or tried to ask for more money up front to really run it and hire somebody. And that's kind of what we were talking about doing. The dispatch thing in particular was going to require a lot of I think it was a $2 million capital nut that was kind of the barrier to really, you know, starting up a new operation. You know, even though you could maybe steal some equipment, and I shouldn't say steal, bring some equipment from the current operations into it, there was still a lot that had to be modernized. So I don't know, is that helpful? It's just hard to find that one entity. And, you know, I think if I was going to make a nudge here as what to do about it, I do think exploring the COG model would be quite beneficial, because at that point you kind of know you're working with the COG as that central convener and staff person or staff to get things rolling, and then also it makes it easier to just hire someone, whatever the service is, or, you know, pay for the service in a way that the municipalities have shared power to run it, because the power dynamics are very real. You know, even when I'm watching Heinsberg and Richmond and Richmond trying to do joint police. And, you know, I think ultimately they may end up contracting with one another, but you know, that is only because I think like one police chief left, and now they're like, you know, the town without a police chief is like, okay, now we need to contract with somebody to do the service. So it's not a shared service where they have equal power at the table.
Yeah. Senator Harris.
And this is a different question, I'm not following.
No, that's okay.
Okay, so Charlie, thank you for being here. So in the Union Municipal District model, and that is what the communication union districts are, right?
Right.
Do you see changes that should be made to the statute to make that work better?
No, I don't. I just think it's a very complicated and intensive model to make towns try to do that over and over and over, right? And so, you know, I'm seeing it certainly in Chittenden County, and I kind of wonder if, like, couldn't all the town select board chairs be on one body that controls all the joint municipal services, instead of having to form new governments every single time? So, sorry, I'm being negatively responsive.
No, that's very
honesty
helpful
is-
response.
Yeah, honesty is preferred, thank you, that's helpful.
Yeah, Chris, go ahead.
And Charlie, this is actually, I think I remember our correction correctly, this is actually why I suggested you meet with this group. Was a while ago, we had a conversation about, like, in our region, we struggle, like, to have the resources to get the towns together to have the intermunicipal shared agreement conversation. But Charlie, I think you mentioned to me a couple of times that in your region it's a different experience and that there are so many intermunicipal agreements that maybe it's sometimes it's difficult for townships to keep track of them or for them to be well managed or resourced. So it seemed like like in our region, we have relatively few, except for the ones that the towns enter into among themselves. There's of course mutual aid with regard to road crews, and occasionally they'll share like a zoning administrator or something. But I think, Charlie, you had told me just how complicated it's gotten because there are so many of them up in your region. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, probably some of my more urban towns, they might be a party to maybe 6 or 7 different union municipal districts, not counting the school districts. And so, the other thing I've observed is that it's also a layer removed from elected officials. And so, the select board appoints a rep to that union municipal district board. And then that board is then, developing the budget and sending back to the town like, oh, here's what you owe next year. And it feels a little wonky that it's not, that elected officials don't have a little bit more control over some of these. Now, some union municipal districts, I think, are elected, probably school boards being an example, but others are not. So I don't know, I guess maybe Senator Harrison, maybe that's a question, maybe if I was going to think about union municipal districts more, that it actually does need to have some, like the elected officials involved more. And that's why, I was kind of like turning to the COG model, like, let's just put them on one board and where they address multiple services, rather than having multiple boards, because it would definitely be overwhelming if select board members had to serve on all these.
Yeah, and I mean, also to the question I have asked several times about transparency and accountability. There's very little transparency, especially when you're talking about multiple layered intermunicipal things. Nobody knows, the average person doesn't know who's in charge of what, let alone, often the municipalities don't know who's in charge of what, let alone the average like Vermonter. And there's not that sense of accountability because in a lot of these, the select board can just appoint somebody from the community that's not an elected official and doesn't necessarily have the accountability or the expertise or whatever to be on something. Not that that happens all the time, but it doesn't, there aren't necessarily qualifications.
Yeah, and I don't mean to disparage any folks that volunteer for any of those efforts. Everybody's well-intentioned and trying to do the right things. So,
absolutely.
Looking at Representative Andrews, who's on, the CUD, right? So.
What are you on? You're on the CUD board? Yeah. Are there other questions for Charlie? Is there anything else? We have, I think, 7 more minutes of your time. Is there anything else from your experience that you want us to start thinking about as we do this work or suggestions for us?
The one idea that has been just bubbling in my mind that I wish that we could take the time to look at a little more comprehensive look. I wasn't here in the 1960s, but there was like a pretty major look at the services that government was expected to provide and which level of government should do it, right? And that's why municipalities don't have poor farms anymore, right? As one example, but it feels like we're at a point in Vermont where it might be time to kind of take the broader look at all of these services and which services is best delivered at which level of government. And, in particular, I think these emergency public safety services, might be the thing to really start with because, over and over, and I know your committee has heard, I don't know how many years of testimony about dispatch issues, but that's really just the tip of the iceberg, because towns are struggling to find volunteer fire and volunteer EMS folks. Policing is very, very inconsistent across the state. And so you know, I don't, and I don't know the exact charge of this committee, but, you know, taking a look at all these services that are being asked, and also we're seeing municipalities just be overwhelmed by how many things they're getting asked to do, and they're run, you know, most of our municipalities are volunteer run. You know, part of some of my towns are the exceptions, but I still have half my towns are just volunteers, and the more things that are being required to do are just more opportunities for failure. And so I would love it if we could take a bigger look at all the services and really figure out what should be at what layer of government. So anyway, that's my nudge if I was going to have one.
Well, thank you. That's what this committee is doing actually, at the regional level. So looking at what from the local level and from the state level might be better done at the regional level. And if there are things that should move to the regional level, how do we structure our regional government? Do we have, you know, more structured and county government, or do we do a council of governments or something different? You know, I think our end report will be similar to actually that memo that you did about, you know, here are the pros and cons of different models, and here's what we ultimately recommend, which, and doing nothing is always an option, but I think that we'll probably hear enough that at the very least, we would want to make some tweaks to what we have.
Yeah, and you know, the county model in Vermont isn't, right? I mean, it's pretty much the sheriff and the assistant judges. You know, and you know, is there something there to be built on? Maybe, because one of the issues that you're going to run into quickly is the taxation issue. And you know, how does it funded in a reasonable way? So that's definitely something to take a closer look at also. So thank you for your work. Thank you all for all the whole committee for doing all this.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for joining us while you're also doing something else. And we'll certainly have you back at another time. The final report from this committee is not due for another year.
Right.
So we have some time, and there's a technical advisory group that Chris Campany is the RPC rep on. And Michael Gahn, who's on the screen with you, is facilitating that. So you might get pulled into that as well. So thank you for coming and talking with us today, and we'll certainly have you back when we can.
Thank you. Yeah, let us know how we all can help, and yeah, thank you, Chris, for repping the RPCs. But yeah, I think all the RPCs are interested in this and kind of frankly challenged with these issues in their own regions. So this is not a unique issue.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank
you so much. Good luck. Have fun there.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Not too much.
Not too
Not
much.
too much
Exactly.
fun. Yeah, exactly.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Yeah, take care.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Charlie. All right, Tim also did a memo, which is on our website, about intermunicipal agreements. And I think it pairs well with Charlie's because it is about sort of what is the legal structure. So if you want to pull that up. Okay, Tim, go ahead.
Thank you very much for having me, Chair Hardy. For the record, my name is Tim Devlin, Legislative Counsel. Committee members, before you have a medium-length memo, really kind of going into the details of what are intermunicipal agreements, which is actually kind of a more casual term or a term of my own. Technically, it's really grouped as kind of an umbrella term for interlocal contracts. And union municipal districts, as laid out in the statute. I also answered select questions regarding regional planning commissions, but don't do a side-by-side of union municipal districts and regional planning commissions. But if the committee wishes, I'm happy to kind of do a side-by-side comparison of various aspects of the numerous versions of regional governance. And if you ever want to take a look at the list, I included a similar appendix to this one as I did to the previous amendment, just listing out the Vermont regional government entities. of which we'll just be looking at really 2.5 today. And I think the way I was thinking of approaching this, Chair Hardy, is just kind of quickly walking through and stopping for questions, stopping for to provide additional detail or one we can kind of bore down as you like.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay. So, intermunicipal agreements in Vermont as detailed in one chapter of Title 24, which is where we find all our kind of county and local government statutes, specifically Chapter 121 of Title 24. These take two basic forms. First is an interlocal contract, which is a strictly contractual relationship between municipalities to perform government services, activities, and undertakings. That's the language of the law there. Kind of funny 3 words there. The second form is the Union Municipal District, sometimes referred as UMDs. And these are the much more involved legal relationships between existing municipalities that create what I like to call kind of a superstructure that constitutes a new legal entity in and of its own self, that is new body, politic, and corporate, with its own governance structure and can be dissolved or modified at the decision of the governing body. That is of the UN. The difference between these two forms is that the districts take on the trappings of an independent local government and have the ability to conduct larger operations like bonding itself or construction improvements. And I just want to stop here and note quickly that Chapter 121 defines municipalities the same as that Title I classic definition, which is to, quote, include a city, town, school district, incorporated school, or fire district, or incorporated village, and all other governmental incorporated units. I don't know what portion of established union municipal districts consist of more than towns and cities and villages. I'd have to look around to see exactly if fire districts have ever been involved in, putting together something. I just don't know. The next page of the memo, page 2, we have just a quick side-by-side just comparing interlocal contracts and union municipal districts. They're pretty much oranges and apples. But you can kind of see here there's some differences and similarities, I should point out, by how they're brought into existence, that is, who they're authorized by, the purpose in which they function, or purpose in which they serve, the powers really that are granted to union municipal districts, and then also a note on receiving aid and assistance.
Is this too?
Senator Harrison, yeah, no, go
This is too
ahead.
early. So, 2 questions.
Sure.
Having the authority to impose taxes or fees.
Mhm.
I don't see that under union municipal district,
Let's see, so
which I don't think they do have that authority.
they, that's a good question. I'm trying to recall the top of my head. I do list out the powers later on.
Okay.
Let me just maybe.
And the other part of the question, oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, sorry, go ahead. Search wall.
I thought something that came up this morning about sovereign immunity was really interesting and important. And I think that's something that we should look at when we talk about these different entities.
Yes, that would certainly be a consideration. I had a note here. Vermont case law describes the discretionary function, kind of analysis that comes in with, it's the test that the courts apply to see exactly if something is a ministerial function taken by an officer on behalf of a municipality, or if it's really discretionary. And that can get to the qualified immunity idea of, okay, if it's, under what circumstances is what in the government they really kind of paying damages, typically in a tort fashion. But certainly that does come up with corporate, or I should say bodies, politic and corporate, of which a union municipal district would be in and of itself. And similar with the other kind of legal sort of trappings before of a municipality, a classic idea of like being able to be sued and to sue itself. Things like that. Yeah, so this certainly would be a consideration
Okay.
for towns wanting to form entities, you know, choosing which kind of other government form to take. Again, all those that are listed on the appendix 1 of the memo. To your other point about powers, I'd have to probably do a little bit of a deeper dive. I can't recall off the top of my head the taxing authority, although I will say this, that one of the powers and duties of union municipal districts is that they are, this is under section 4866, subsection 8, union municipal district may exercise any powers which are exercised or exercised by any of its participating municipalities and necessary or desirable for dealing with problems of mutual concern. So that's kind of an umbrella power. Maybe it falls under there. I'd have to take a closer look.
I don't think they have taxing authority.
And I'm happy to be.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they don't, but you should definitely check for that. I think they can, in some cases, bond if they're given that authority.
Yes, that I.
Right,
So,
yeah.
But that's probably after a vote also, but anyway.
Yeah,
But functionally, that's the states through setting up that municipal charter has delegated the authority to do those very specific things, or this more general authority that you're talking about that the individual municipalities that are members have, right?
Right. And I should say that actually later on in the memo, I kind of compare, I list out some examples of union and municipal districts. And some of those have actually been chartered as well. And the idea behind that is that they can have expanded powers beyond what's here in chapter 121. And some of those actually are here. I'm sorry. I think more formal eminent domain powers. Yes, establishing certain rates, charges, and fees, exemptions from certain regulations, or deviations from processes for entering and withdrawing from districts. So it's kind of coming back to me now that what's not in chapter 121, what could be granted by the legislature, or delegated to two municipalities by the General Assembly through charter, would be those more formal certain rate, being able to establish rates, charges, and fees. So I would say that 121 does not include taxing authority.
So for example, a waste management district can set the fee for what my compost pickup is every month, but they don't have the ability to say to all their member towns, we're assessing a general fee, because that's not within the authority that they've been granted.
okay, carry on.
So let's see. We'll start with interlocal contracts. This is on page 2 of the memo under that table. Chapter 121, so chapter 4 enables municipalities to enter into interlocal contracts and describes the parameters for doing so. One or more municipalities may contract with other municipalities to perform any governmental service, so long as the legislative body of each municipality approves the contract and the related expenses are included in the budget for the spending municipality. Contract shall set forth certain items, including purposes, powers, the rights and objectives of all the parties involved. And the contract may further include information regarding the method of choosing and terminating officers, the powers of those officers, designation of a local or regional board to handle jurisdiction of the contracting municipalities, a transfer of all or a portion of local services from one municipality to another, the acquisition, maintenance, and use of property and services, and the management of special funds for joint municipal activities. That's really it about interlocal contracts, really just be best thought of as a traditional contract between two municipalities. Moving on to the union municipal districts, which is much more involved. And again, these are a form of regional governance among participating municipalities that possesses the powers of those municipalities, namely the legislative, bonding, and taxing authority I have here. I'm going to go back and dig into this issue more, all of which are important from building out and operating shared infrastructure and supporting assets. To create a union municipal district, in brief, municipalities may enter into an agreement to form a joint municipal survey committee, in essence, an exploratory committee, which in turn proposes a second, more formal agreement for municipalities to enter into to form a union municipal district. The agreement to form a union municipal district, however, must be first reviewed by the Attorney General and then approved by the voters of each participating municipality. Once formed, the district can be added to, withdrawn from, and dissolved. Significantly more detail about that, but I just don't want to stop and take your time.
Yeah, I don't think we need significant more detail right now. The one thing also, these are optional, so you can create something and a town can say, I don't want to be part of that, so they can not, participate in the CUD or the.
Sorry, which aspects are optional powers and duties?
Meaning that the voters have to approve participation in that. So if the voters don't approve, then the municipality wouldn't be involved in whatever it is.
Yes, correct. Municipality cannot be compelled to join.
Yeah.
Note that if, let's say there's a vote between 6 towns, it doesn't have to be unanimous vote amongst all of them. It depends on the parameters of the agreement that's set up by the joint municipal survey committee first. They could have it set a certain threshold, so 4 of the 6 towns need to vote, and then it can be formed, et cetera, et cetera. But really there's kind of a reconsideration at the point to see if the surviving towns that did vote and want to maintain the district as or whether reform. Same would happen if once a district is put together and set up, a municipality or a government wants to leave, that same reconsideration is triggered.
Yeah. Senator Harrison.
Thank you. So if a municipality wanted to leave and there had been improvements done in that municipality in the meantime, this looks like you may be able to say that you can leave, yes, but you need to compensate the rest of the folks.
Okay, interesting question. A member municipality may withdraw from a district only after a year after the district is formed, and 2, if the district is not bonded for construction or improvements. The statutes aren't particularly clear on what happens if, can a municipality kind of settle up and then exit. I would say there's room in the municipality, has to put out bylaws that govern the entrance and exit of member municipalities. I would imagine something like that would be detailed in those bylaws.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, carry on.
Okay. Let's see. I've included a list of examples of union municipal districts in section C at the bottom of page 4. Here, let's see, it provides links to those, as well as some of the governing documents that you'll find as well. They include Addison Solid Waste Management District, Essex Parks and Rec Regional District, Chittenden County Regional Dispatch. Some of those are followed by asterisks, and these are the union municipal districts before that have also been chartered. Really, I would probably just refer to them as chartered entities. However, when you pull open those charters, they're codified in the appendices to Title 24. They make explicit reference to union municipal districts.
Mm.
So,
And one of the Chittenden County Regional Dispatch doesn't actually function, as we just learned.
right.
So they exist on paper.
Right. I think that's the same for Rutland. There's a recreational one that was put together, which I didn't list here.
Uh-huh.
Some of them don't really get too far off the ground. They've been formally approved. I should also point out to the committee that these kind of are grouped by certain public services that they provide: solid waste management, parks and rec, public safety and dispatch, and planning. Interestingly enough, there's one planning organization here as well. And moving on to the next page, D, beyond union municipal districts, chartered regional entities. Just want to reiterate this point that those that are chartered, the presumptive thinking behind why they're chartered is really by being chartered, these districts are granted additional powers beyond those granted in Title 24, Chapter 121, including the abilities to establish rates, charges, and fees, exemptions from certain regulations, deviations in processes for entering and withdrawing from districts, other eminent domain powers, incurring debt as well. There's additional processes for those.
Okay.
The second half of this memo, it has to do with regional planning commissions. And unlike union municipal districts, which create a superstructure to provide shared government services to member municipalities, these regional planning commissions really more so supplement member municipalities' ability to navigate the state's requirements for planning and development. This memo, I just want to point out, this again doesn't make a side-by-side comparisons between union municipal districts and regional planning commissions. I certainly can produce something like that if the committee was interested. But what this memo does is provide answers to these questions. A, what can regional planning commissions do and not do? B, how are representatives appointed and how long are their terms? And C, how accountable are commissions? Starting with A, what regional planning commissions can do and cannot do. I refer to the statute 24 VSA, section 4345, which details the optional powers and duties of regional planning commissions. These powers entail, as the name suggests, planning services to be delivered to the member municipalities. And these can take the form of, and I list out a bunch of them broken down by subcategories here. Undertaking studies, making recommendations on land and economic development, transportation, historic and environmental preservation, state capital investments, retaining employees and consultants, carrying out economic development programs, providing planning, training, and development services to local communities, et cetera, et cetera. And then there are also some more substantive powers, including the power to acquire real estate and incur debts, and also a catch-all power that is, quote, to perform such other acts and functions as it may deem necessary or appropriate to fulfill the duties and obligations imposed by the intent and purposes of this chapter. These powers are led to the Regional Planning Commission's duties, which predominantly involve advising and providing direct technical assistance to member municipalities in various aspects of prepping and updating regional plans, faithfully and effectively implementing those regional plans. Say, taking these powers and duties together, it's apparent that the regional planning commissions are intended, as the legislation lays out, to largely facilitate municipalities' planning and development rather than developing it themselves. In contrast with the union, that is, in contrast with the municipal districts, which are very much about doing the work themselves. Regional planning commissions do not have the fundamental powers reserved for bodies politic and corporate, like legislative functions, and the authority to tax or to take property by eminent domain. Although I should quickly note that commissions can adopt bylaws and own procedures, nothing like the typical municipal ordinance adoption powers. Second question, how representatives are appointed in their terms. Representatives to regional planning commissions, I should just note here that there's kind of a switch in terminology. Municipal planning commissions use the term commissioners, and regional planning commissions technically use the term representatives. Representatives to a regional planning commissions are to be appointed by the legislative body of the municipalities. The terms of the representatives are established in the bylaws of the regional planning commission establishment documents.
And again, these don't necessarily have to be members of the municipal legislative body. correct?
I believe that is the case.
Yeah,
I have to check.
it could be just,
They don't body.
I know some that are not.
yeah, exactly. It can be anybody that,
And that's certainly the case for the Union Municipal District.
yeah. Okay,
The third question here, commission and having to do with what are the commission representatives? What is the level of accountability of the commission representatives? Representatives are foremost accountable to their home municipality. Statutes say that representatives to the commission shall serve at the pleasure of the participating municipality's legislative body. The legislative body of the participating municipality, that is, may by majority vote of the entire body revoke a commission member's appointment at any time. There's also, to a certain extent, the power of the purse at play here. Although the regional planning commissions may accept funds from essentially anywhere, a member or municipality may fund a commission as and finally, a member municipality may leave a regional planning commission. That is, if they don't like it, they can essentially walk away from it. At least it may move from, and this is where there's some vagaries in the statutes. I should say that more technically, they may move from one regional planning commission to another regional planning commission on terms and conditions approved by the Secretary of Commerce and Community Development. And really, again, it's kind of unclear whether they can just formally withdraw from a commission and be unassociated. There's, the law doesn't explicitly speak to this circumstance.
okay. Are there any towns that don't belong to one that anyone knows of?
I do not know.
Okay,
There may be one in Lemoyle.
okay,
I'm not 100% sure, but if I can just follow up on that.
Yeah.
But really, I mean, to disengage, just don't appoint a commissioner.
right.
Because we can't make a town do anything.
Are there, well, and maybe this is gonna get into your presentation a little bit more, and we can ask you these sort of on the ground questions, but, so let's hold that. Are there any other questions about the legal, aspects of these options or these existing structures for Tim? Yeah, go ahead.
So so the state established the regional planning commissions, was there, but with federal requirements? I saw that here somewhere. I'm just wondering, was there a benefit to the state of establishing those? Requiring the districts?
I am unaware of any federal requirements that were integrated through state statute. I can't speak whether there were or not. I'd have to take a look at these leading in intent language there. But I should say that this chapter 121 and Title 24 doesn't really actually establish who's in which towns and which regional planning commission, rather just sets up the structure of this is what they shall entail, this is the functional operations of them, how they can be formed and dissolved, but not, I may be missing.
I guess what I'm asking is, I thought I read, but I'm not seeing it now, that it was a top-down requirement rather than a bottom-up requirement. And that it was a requirement to have regional commissions, regional planning commissions, no?
Well, it's, I can say that it's sister to the municipal planning commissions, and that this is the next level up from that. And Title 24 really kind of groups both of those together, those enabling statutes. So first it was municipal planning commissions and then into regional ones from that. But from what I've reviewed, I haven't been able to really pick up on any sort of federal mandates from those.
Okay, thanks. I thought.
Yeah,
And
Chris.
it is, and so this is great, you were cutting my presentation down a lot. So RPCs, when they were first created, RPCs are created by an act of voters or legislative body of each of a number of contiguous municipalities with approval by ACCD. So that was I don't know how far that statute goes back, it must be the original, probably the original language from the enabling statute.
1967.
Yeah. But what you may be thinking about, not to get into the personal, but since you're husband's father was a
Father-in-law,
founder,
yeah.
was one among the founders of the Wyndham Regional Commission. We were, was the day with NVDA who was first. They did establish it in part because during the counterculture, we had so many young people arriving in the state. They're trying to figure out what's a good vehicle to bring in federal grants to support like these services to all these people who were coming. And so they absolutely did look at it as a vehicle to bring in federal funds. So that may
be what I'm thinking.
that may
Yeah.
be part of what you're thinking about, because you're familiar with our history, and that was part of what the aegis for creating, and the same thing with, as youth services, and we also had the Council on Aging was, for a long time, we were the Council on Aging too, the Wyndham Regional Commission and Council on Aging. And again, that was federal funds coming in, so that may be what
Okay.
you're thinking about, was as a useful vehicle to be able to access those funds. Yeah, so that may be what you're thinking.
Mm-hmm.
I wish we had that problem now. We have so many young people coming into our state that we didn't know what to do. So we created regional planning commissions. All right, are there any other questions for Tim?
And I should
Oh,
just
go ahead.
note that there's much more detail kind of in the meat of the memo in the middle there about how to bring about a union municipal district, how it operates and how it can be dissolved or people can withdraw from it. Municipalities can withdraw from it.
So this, what Charlie was saying in his testimony or at the end, a conversation in the 60s about what level of government should do what. This was probably born out of that a little bit, right? Yeah. That seems like one of the results of it. So maybe we're up for a refresh, perhaps.
Perhaps.
Does it still work?
And for what it's worth, I worked on getting language to that effect inserted into the climate action plan. too. And this is part of the aegis for like my involvement, at least, in like in the Flood Safety Act, and like regulating river corridors at the state level, as opposed to deferring to do it on a town by town basis, because there are just some things that geographically and from a life safety perspective make more sense if you implement it at a statewide level, as opposed to a patchwork quilt of whether or not a town has the political and operational capacity to adopt. I didn't mean to just jump in there, but I mean, I think there's more and more thinking, especially driven by the flooding, and just thinking about what can towns really do.
That's why Doug's sitting at the table with us. All right, any other questions for Tim? All right, so this is a good segue into having Chris come up and sit in the witness chair and chat with us about RPCs more broadly, including your thoughts about what we should do.
For the record, I'm Chris Canton, Executive Director of Wyndham Regional Commission, representing the Regional Planning Commissions on the Technical Advisory Group. And I'll get my presentation up here.
Oh, Michael, I see your hand up. I'm sorry if I missed you before.
No, just while Chris was looking for that, I didn't want to lose the thought. There's been a lot of talk about these efforts in the 60s. I wondered if from the archive we had those reports. I'm really curious about that prior work. That was my only question.
Yeah,
Charlie had referenced it.
I think that would be something we could ask our the UVM folks to look into, because I think they might have students who could do that kind of archival digging for the information that might be helpful as background.
Our state archivist is going to love that question, though.
Yeah. The state archivist, we took a great field trip there. So I'm sure they have a lot of that information. So that's a great idea to add to the scope of work.
Very cool. Yeah, I just know from our experience, when I look back at the stuff that was written or thought about in the 70s on the bond bank, it's surprisingly relevant to today, and I find it very useful. So just was curious. Thanks so much.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
Great idea.
We have a slight technical issue that I need to be allowed to join.
Oh, where is Mike? Mike?
It's fine, it's a button there.
Okay. Mike McCarthy's going to be our committee assistant for a minute.
And I'll be happy to share with you we did a whole 50th anniversary kind of oral history recordings.
Oh,
I'll
really?
share with you guys because we're fortunate to have all the directors, former directors, still with us, and we go way back.
Wow.
To what, how.
Are you trying?
I don't.
Yeah. So Tony, we're going to let them know you're here.
I'm not seeing a request on the participants screen.
Do you want me to try it again?
Yeah, so I would, and just make sure that you're on today's, so.
I don't see anything.
Mike's been promoted.
I don't know about that.
It should be popping up now. I'm following the link that he sent out last week.
I'm going to go, well, actually,
He went upstairs.
Farhan, do you mind going and seeing if you can find it?
I'll take a walk.
Thank you. Can you take a walk, Bob?
We were at 250 was born. Governor Dean Davis was looking at the haystack
There you go.
mountain development and all the septic systems and said,
They're there.
this keeps up, we're gonna lose the Vermont brand.
It's just a bit of comparison.
I know, that's a really important little fact. Good job.
Now Chris
We
is-
found him, like,
I used to do that for a living, you know.
yeah,
Yeah.
you're good at it.
That's the dry, what we expect from Senator North.
Share screen.
We have two, Kristen.
Yeah.
Wait, did you send your things beforehand?
Okay.
Chris,
I did.
you did. They're not on our,
I sent it last week. So sent it as a PDF.
okay. For now, we'll look up on the screen.
Okay. Okay, can you see me? Okay. Okay, thank you for having me. So what I'm gonna do is provide an overview of things that we do, just to familiarize you with the kind of the range of things that we do with our towns. Then I'm gonna go through quickly now, kind of the structure of RPCs, the duties and optional powers. Then I'm gonna talk a little bit about how we're funded, because that has a huge impact on what we actually do. Then I'm gonna kind of do a summary of what all this means collectively. And I'm gonna just wrap up, just like literally a slide each on why we're not like counties and why we're not like COGS. So, yeah. Let's see. Okay. So we have 11 regional planning commissions in the state with more than 125 staff serving all of Vermont's municipalities. We're a critical resource for the state and policy deliberations and implementation because we're a link directly between municipalities and state governments. We're often called upon to support policy development and implementation in areas of land use, housing, energy, transportation, water quality, emergency management, and more. And we're councils, boards, advisory groups. And we, as we say a lot, in the absence of county government, the regional planning commissions play a critical role in connecting communities with federal, state, and local programs. We are political subdivisions of the state, but and theoretically, I guess we're regional government, but the only thing we govern is ourselves. So our commissioners govern their commissions. We don't have any governmental authority beyond that. At the regional level, we coordinate community plans with regional plans, making sure that they don't get sideways with one another and that the different municipal plans can align with one another. And when we want to get into the duties and responsibilities, one of our roles is to kind of deconflict that. In our region, we've had mercifully very little of that, but I understand that other regions have been more. But because of the work that we do, we have this broader intermunicipal view, right? Everything from the data we collect to just even working with towns, just regular engagement with planning commissions, select boards, conservation commissions, emergency management directors, energy committees. We just have this view of what's going on individually within the towns, and then collectively kind of opportunities there might be for them to collaborate with one another. Brownfields are one of our biggest programs where we actually pass through funding or provide a direct kind of contractual service with municipalities. We have a revolving loan fund. We also pursue other assessment and remediation grants. We're involved in watershed planning and project development. We are not among the clean water service providers associated with Lake Champlain and Memphremagog. I'm not exactly sure when that's coming to the Connecticut River Basin, but when the municipal roads, permit rolled out, and I just want to kind of get into the nitty gritty of this. Municipalities were expected to make new road standards related to their ditches and disconnecting them from streams and ponds and rivers. New ditching, the way that they're supposed to do ditching and putting riprap in the ditches and those kinds of things. But generally speaking, the municipalities were contracting directly with the RPCs, and so we deployed staff, interns, and others to literally go out, drive, walk, bike, run, pretty much every single mile of municipal roadway in the state. It was interesting to me when I came here about 15 years ago, just how much, one of the things that towns value the most that we do is road and bridge inventories, municipal sign inventories, and now through the road erosion inventories, we just really got to have this intimate knowledge of the roads and how those relate to water quality, including even class 4 town roads. So like we hired a very energetic intern to run them to find like where they were effectively referred to as puking gullies. So we developed this really intimate relationship with the towns physically too. So among a lot of our staff, when we're talking about, hey, there's this culvert on a town road that blew out during the disaster, we know exactly where it is. We probably walked it or biked it or something. And economic and community development. Now, as you know, some RPCs are also and also serve as a RDC. There's been a union. NVDA was always that way from the outset. Bennington County merged not too long ago. We collaborate very closely with Brattleboro Development Credit Corporation. They serve the same region that we do, and we works out really well together. We do a lot of planning at like the community development scale. But we also, of course, have roles in Act 250 and Section 248 and other things. So it's nice to kind of have that separation where they can work directly with businesses and kind of be their advocates and kind of hold their hands going through things where we because they're established as a nonprofit, whereas we're established as a political subdivision, we kind of need to maintain a little bit of distance sometimes. But we also work with towns on like wastewater and water systems, planning, form, engineering, and a lot of the public engagement all around those things. Municipal planning implementation, we're the primary go-to entities for towns when they have questions about developing their town plans, developing their zoning, also implementation, special studies. The primary planning goal in Vermont is to just have maintain the pattern of compact settlements surrounded by a rural countryside. And this goes all the way from the regional level down to the local level. And so that's what we've been tasked with for decades. It's actually interesting also a number of state guidance policies too. So Vermont was really kind of cutting edge on that to try to reduce sprawl. Housing, there's relatively little that we can do beyond the planning phase. We don't own property, we can't develop property, but we provide a lot of technical advice for towns, especially on their plans and their zoning, and understanding like a lot of my work since the pandemic has really been, if you want housing, if you want a housing trust, or you want a private developer to come in, you're going to have the infrastructure to support it, because especially if you're talking about housing that's at a price point that an average Vermonter can afford. Because if a developer has to come in and put in their own wastewater system, that's going to blow the price well out of the water. So we do a lot of that kind of one-on-one engagement, and oftentimes we have to do it with the same municipality many times, right? Because planning commissions change a lot. So we may do it 1 year and come back in another couple of years and do it again, and come back another couple of years and do it again. Geographic Information System Services, we are a critical GIS resource, not only for the regions and our municipalities, but also for the state. Within the State Emergency Operations Center, we have to provide that bench depth. We send our GIS planners there to help when there's a disaster, but chances are if you go into, unless, I think Brattleboro has some GIS capacity, Rockingham might have some, but otherwise there's GIS capacity for all the towns. So when you walk into a town office and you see whether it's a zoning map or a town road map or a bridge and culvert inventory, chances are we did that. By we, I mean collectively. Transportation planning is our largest single programmatic area. We have one MPO in the state, which you've already heard about what those are. That's in Chittenden County. The rest of us, we don't have that same kind of resource to actually develop like specific detailed transportation planning and transportation plan priorities within our regions. Our role is more connecting VTrans with municipalities, sending projects up when VTrans is going through its project prioritization process. We bring that down to the towns, and at the regional level, we identify priorities. Really, they get sent down to us from VTrans. But again, this is probably where we have our most intimate relationship with the towns. We're hosting, I think it's tomorrow, our regular quarterly meeting with road foremen. And because this is right, especially for the more rural towns, I understand that Vermont rural is a very fine-grained continuum. But this tends to be their largest budget item, right? And their biggest responsibility. So having that kind of relationship just makes sense. And our transportation planning initiative, the relationship we have with VTrans is really good. I wish we could model that more with agreements we have with other agencies. Our role in emergency preparedness and disaster resiliency, we help support the regional emergency management committees, which bring together first responders, emergency management directors, and others involved in the process throughout the region. But also through this, we help towns apply for like hazard mitigation grants. I'm gonna get into the details, but we had traditionally worked with them on developing their annual local emergency management plans. We help train their EMDs. Frankly, we feel from them, hey, what training do you want? How would you like to work together more? But this is not public safety. This is emergency management planning. And separately, through the weird ways that federal acquisition policy works, procurement policy works, we can't help towns apply for grants from the feds to develop their local all hazard mitigation plans, but we tend to be the entities that work with them to develop those. So again, as far as like kind of intimacy and familiarity, we tend to know exactly what the hazard profiles are for each municipality.
Wait, can you say that again? You can help them with the plan, but not with an application for federal funds?
Yes, under the FEMA rules, the potential service provider can't apply for the grant, can't help the town apply for the grant. So it'd be like, so the VEM has to take that on all themselves. Because this gets into this vagary, these weird dynamics. Otherwise, there's this thing called our indirect cost rate, and that's basically the rate that we establish we follow OMB rules. Bear with me on this, but this is really important. We follow OMB rules by which we establish a rate that we can charge across contracts to pay for stuff like copying machines and heat and rent and just basic things like that.
Yeah.
So with FEMA on certain grants, we can't by federal statute, we can't get our indirect rate, which can be a substantial portion of our billing rate, if we are directly contracted with them. So, and therefore, because we would be a potential bidder on some programs, it means the state then has to work individually with towns to get them to apply for a federal grant through the state that we can then bid on and do the work for the towns. Now, one of the things—
And you can't apply directly on behalf of the towns?
we're trying to figure out if there are ways to like do actual regional all hazard mitigation plans. Chittenden County has one. The challenge is all the towns have to adopt it at the same time. And imagine herding those cats, and especially for towns that don't have professional staff. If you have town managers, that's one thing, but trying to do that among volunteer select boards and across a profile. Again, as a reminder, our region, our largest town is Brattleboro with a population around 12,000, our smallest town is Somerset with a population of 6. So we have a very broad profile of towns.
Yeah.
Just to add into that, yeah, FEMA basically treats regional planning commissions as if they were a business or a contractor. They don't recognize the structure in their approaches, so they lump them in with businesses and third-party contractors and assume that there's a conflict of interest. So that's why they prohibit them from participating in the preparation process for something they might compete for down the road, when it's not really business competition. That's not what RPCs do, right?
Yeah.
The indirect rate is a real problem, and not just for RPCs, but it's for a lot of programs because if you're not allowed to charge your indirect rate, it basically means you will take a loss on that engagement. The whole purpose of the indirect rate is to prevent the nonprofit or government entity from taking a loss. That's more of something for the congressional delegation, honestly, that FEMA doesn't allow indirect rates. That's just wrong in my opinion.
Yeah, without going too far ahead, on the funding question, like, so our emergency management planning grant, which supports this work, requires a 50% non-federal match out of us. So that means our other state contract money has to be the match for that. And then if you don't get your indirect rate on top of that, then we're operating at a serious loss.
Wow.
So yeah, just fine.
Rep. Andrews.
So theoretically, if you were like a true county government entity, would that shift that relationship?
I think it might, because then it would be a county employee. It's a county government function with probably a paid professional county emergency management director. And so the county would receive funds to then assist other municipalities to do their, or the county, more likely than not at a county scale, you're developing your hazard mitigation plan. So I think that it's more of a direct pipeline.
I mean,
Yeah.
to answer that hypothetical as well, I think even if it wasn't a full county government, you took RPCs as they are now and you vest them with the responsibility to maintain hazard mitigation plans within their area. If they were the legal entity responsible, then they would be eligible applicants. FEMA looks at only what you are legally responsible to do. And RPCs, like Chris said, they only govern within themselves. They have a lot of support, they do a lot of services, but they don't have the ultimate legal responsibility. So even if you just added that one element, for instance, that would make them qualify for be eligible applicants. It wouldn't disqualify towns because you could maintain both having the ability to do that planning.
So why didn't this come up last year when we were doing that big bill on flood mitigation? You know what I'm talking about, S310? Yeah, I don't remember this coming up as something that was a tweak that we could have made to make things a little easier.
Well,
Do you remember?
Could I-
Yeah, go ahead.
so I don't think anyone was asking us to take away the responsibility. So this is the crux of like, with all these issues, because it would require, if I'm understanding you right, Doug, to go from what we have now where it's towns, and then we have this, the full state plan, but it's towns that have the individual emergency plans. We don't have a regional.
We do have regional emergency management committees
But
that
not the planning, it's the towns that are responsible for the actual.
Yeah,
What I was saying is give us the authority, just not taking it away from the towns, but make it clear in statute, we have that authority to the town on us we can figure out how that works, but making it to where we're not viewed as a government, as a contract, we're not like XYZ consulting firm. It is actually one of our responsibilities to work with towns on this stuff.
It might be good when we're doing the public safety testimony at our December meeting to have this as an agenda item to really get specific about
Yeah.
what level of authority would solve this problem.
Yeah, and I mean, this is obviously one small part of this broader conversation, but I don't remember it coming up last year. And we did talk a lot about regional and local and state emergency planning, as Senator Norris knows, this came up a lot. And I don't remember this specific thing.
Yeah,
getting
I'm
talked about, but-
point of contact on emergency planning, so I'm happy to do a deep dive on this, everybody else. The other challenge we have is that we have an MOU in place with Vermont Emergency Management that really is supposed to cover all the state government. Disaster, BEM, the State Emergency Operations Center can direct us with what help they need. But then FEMA ultimately has to buy into that. And we had an issue last year, for instance, where the last year's flooding, where A&R one, we all maintain certified floodplain managers. They asked us to go out and help them with doing substantial damage estimates to help towns with their flood hazard bylaw implementation. But FEMA said they wouldn't reimburse us, so the state opted not to, wouldn't reimburse the state for our use in that way. And so the state opted not to use us. So that meant it then fell on the few staff at DEC and a couple other people they were able to bring in to do it, whereas they could have probably tapped into one of the 11 RPCs. So that's getting into the weeds, but this gets into this whole structural challenge that we have and how the funding can create a.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Energy conservation and all these things, energy conservation and development. So we work with municipalities, especially with Act 171. We work with municipalities to develop what are called like enhanced energy plans, to where they can have do substantial deference rather than due consideration in Section 248 proceedings with regard to renewable energy siting. But all these things, I'll just note, it all is very much dependent, with the exception really of like the basic town planning assistance. All this is really contingent upon what the funding stream is. So RPC structure, you've already seen a lot of this. I'm just going to go through this very quickly. So we are created by active voters for the legislative body. So we're already established. This isn't a big deal, but this is, you'd ask me what are the structures of the structure.
Yeah.
And so all municipalities of the designated region are considered members. Of course, they don't have to participate. Commission shall contain at least one representative. That's determined by the Regional Planning Commission's charters and bylaws. In our region, municipalities can appoint up to two. Not as one a designate, you can have up to two. One of the challenges that this, well, in the RPC structure, members serve at the pleasure of the legislative body regardless of RPC bylaws. And I can tell you that every single commissioner, even if you have two appointed from a town, has a fundamentally different relationship with their select board. There is no, we have what's called a commissioner job description, but basically what we tell them is whatever works for you, because ultimately you're accountable to your town. And sometimes like to hear from their commissioners on a regular basis. Others are don't call us, we'll call you. Most towns are just kind of trying to get anybody they can to serve. And this gets to other issues related to skill sets and other things, but also frankly from a diversity standpoint even, because some people are like, why aren't you very diverse? Well, we don't have any control over what our composition is. RPC exec boards, not how the statute says, not less than 5 and no more than 9 members to oversee operations and implement policies. RPCs may have other members who may be elected or appointed per bylaws. Within our commission, we have what are called citizen interest commissioners. For a time, Senator Harrison was our community development. We also have conservation, natural resources, economic development, healthy communities, but that's all up to us. So RPC duties, there are a lot of them. You heard the overview. I'm not going to go into great detail, but basically we promote mutual cooperation with the development within the region among all these various bodies in the region. We advise municipal governing bodies with respect to public financing. One little anecdote on this, it was fascinating. One year I was the RPC point of contact for transportation, and we got into our agreement with VTrans that we would support municipalities that wanted to help with like capital improvement planning. So when we offered that, you couldn't see them run away fast enough because there's this basic misunderstanding about what capital improvement planning meant. All it is a plan. But they felt like if they had a capital improvement plan, they would have to do it. and therefore they want to create unrealistic expectations for their residents. And so they said, no, we're good. We don't want to do capital improvement planning. But that's kind of a basic kind of local government capacity type issue for larger towns with town managers. Some towns will do this, but it was fascinating. I don't know how common that was statewide with our region. So that advisory, government advisory with respect to public financing is not that easy. Provide technical and legal assistance to municipalities in preparation of their maintenance of their plans. Cooperate across state and other boundaries on our planning efforts. Remember, this is what statute's doing here is enabling us to do stuff so that people can't say, you can't do that, you don't have to offer it. Prepare a regional plan and amendments to it. And then as part of that, we're supposed to have implementation guidelines as part of our plans. Prepare guidelines with DHED for provision of affordable housing. We're supposed to confirm and review municipal plans. We assist municipalities with managing growth and development that has cumulative impacts. And this is particularly critical for us for in areas where we've got resort developments, right? Because it's not just the slope and the housing and the roads and the transit. Are we following?
That's quick.
Still on.
We're still good? Okay.
Okay, carry on.
So this is how to review of state and county expenditures for compatibility with municipal plans. Honestly, I've never seen that happen once. I don't see that. In part because the main, I think, state capital investments we see are through VTrans. So we do help them with that. But otherwise, we're just not seeing a lot of, the state investments. If somebody's proposing a prison or something like that, maybe there would be more of that kind of activity. Obviously, we have a role in Act 250 and Section 248. A critical thing to mention here is that, right, we issue no permits. Our plans are not determinative in any way. In Section 248, I'm still not exactly clear. I've spent probably thousands of hours on Vermont Yankee, where we got due consideration for what was in our regional plan. Under 248A, which is telecom, we're supposed to get substantial deference, but I've seldom ever saw the Public Utility Commission defer to anything that was in our plan. So I'm not exactly sure functionally what the difference is between due consideration and substantial deference, but we're definitely not what's called dispositive, where our policies control. So we're expected to participate in Act 250, Section 248, Section 248A, but that means another entity is interpreting what our plan language says and how it applies relative to all these other goals and criteria within Act 250. So I think I'm saying that you all probably know this, but a lot of the public and even the towns think that we have this incredible power. And we only have the power that the district environmental commissions give us. So.
Does it, but it also requires, sorry.
No, go ahead. No, you're fine.
It also requires the applicants, though, to go to the Regional Planning Commission and at least seek their support and feedback as part of the process, whether it's 248 or 250.
Yeah, it's absolutely important. It's really critical. It's just understanding that, and we'll see how Act 181 plays out and ultimately how the new land use review board and how the determination of the development designated areas and all that comes out. But even there, we're not issuing a permit. And, and I don't think there's anything in the language that says what the RPC says goes. It's taken under advisement, even for the applicants, right? They can say, hey, this is what the regional plan says. We respectfully agree with this aspect of it. We respectfully disagree with this. This is what we want the finding to be of the district environmental plan. So the work we do on that is really important, but we just don't necessarily have the power that some people. I've been in several even rulemaking discussions. I remember when Act 171 was passed, and I was told that by somebody at the Public Service Department that the policies of the regions and the municipalities control. I've never seen that before. So I only bring it up because I think there's a lot of misconceptions about how much power and authority we have. So And that's not a good or bad, it's just,
Yeah.
Yeah, I just think that's a really important point, because my understanding in the energy conversation, the energy permitting, I thought that the regional commissions would have, their position would have more weight than it has in the Act 250, the existing old Act 250.
we'll have to see.
But I thought that was the intent, so that's something we might want to put on our list. It might be a different committee, or it might be a different group. But that should be on somebody's list.
And
that-
there may be somebody
Yeah.
who could, like, we have had limited, Act Section 248 petitions, like no wind or major solar or anything. And I don't know what exactly how they've been treated. I'm just saying that I just know because of Vermont Yankee, when we were involved in those dockets, made lots of cases for why things should be or shouldn't be. And of course, that was when we're supposed to be given due consideration, but again, I'm just reflecting back on 248A, where we're supposed to be given substantial deference. I just didn't see the difference. Not that there's not one, I just, from a very practical perspective, I'm not sure. And there's somebody, another RPC may have been way more involved in this and said, yeah, absolutely, yeah, substantial deference. We really saw a difference in our new regional energy plan before the Public Utility Commission relative to 248, relative to what existed before.
Is this only in the context of Act 250, or is this more broad?
When you're talking about 248,
Yeah,
that's
248.
That's the energy one.
The 248 is
Title 30.
energy
Yeah.
and, okay.
Yeah, because it was something that if the towns did it, they would get substantial
That was
deference.
the
And,
enhanced energy.
and so the
plan.
town was doing something in order to get that.
Right.
So if it didn't get
Right, if they
that,
actually identified the preferred siting locations,
Yes.
they would be given substantial deference. I just don't know what that means. And
Yeah.
VLCT may come in and say, oh, yes, it made a huge difference. I don't know.
yeah, but I'm glad you brought it up.
Yeah, it's something, but the main reason I'm bringing this up is just thinking about what real influence we have when our plans are interpreted and applied. That's something that, yeah, I'm sure it varies, right, by composition of boards and other things, but just know the work we do is really important, and we're very forward-looking, it's data-based. You know, we engage our towns in our planning processes, and the general public, but ultimately, we don't ultimately apply something. That makes us different than like a county.
So how does the general public get involved
So
in
this
the
is-
plans?
I've always want to have a richer conversation with my fellow directors about this, but having worked at county levels and at different levels, you know, our regional plans, now, this is the current structure, not what's going to, under Act 181, is going to change a little bit, bear with me. Under the current structure, when we develop a regional plan, the commissioners adopt it. And it has to be a 2/3 vote of the commissioners. It then goes to towns. And we're supposed to do public outreach and engagement, and we're supposed to have communication. But then it goes to the bodies of each of our municipalities, and if 50% or more veto it effectively, then we have to go back and make changes and bring it back to the municipalities. I don't know that that's ever happened, and not, I mean, certainly happened with us, but I don't know to what extent that's ever happened elsewhere statewide. But ultimately, it's the commissioners, our town board commissioners, because by statute, our citizen interest commissioners can't vote on the regional plan. And it is our towns that approve a plan. So this, relative to other contexts, this is really fascinating to me because we engage with the public. We're about to put out a public review draft for our regional plan, and we're going to be having a robust public engagement policy process starting in January. But ultimately, who the public is trying to influence is we're collecting information to go back to our commissioners as to whether or not they should approve, want to tweak the plan, want to change that document. So. And also, one of the things that you'll notice is, right, we're serving municipalities, and the commission has its own planning responsibilities. We don't serve the general public.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was trying to get at, is that it seems a very indirect public engagement in the work that you do. even though potentially, especially if you're given due consideration, it could be pretty powerful what your plans are, even versus town plans, because they have such a bigger scope.
Right, and so this is one of the challenges, I think, that, as far as the overall structure, because oftentimes I hear, we really need to be thinking about, and this isn't pushing back on public engagement at all, it's like public engagement to what end, because from my perspective as a planner, when I engage with the public, I want them to see what's gonna happen
Right.
as a result of their engagement, not that we're engaging with you. And so what's going to happen is our commissioners will take that under consideration. But unlike a town plan where they control the select board's adoption of it, or it may go to, go onto the ballot.
Yeah.
That's not the case with a regional plan.
Right.
So it's just something to be aware of. We strive for rich, deep and rich, public engagement, but I think it's important for people to understand that dynamic of ultimately how the plan gets adopted. And so of course now that's going to be reviewed we're going to have external evaluation for statutory conformment, through the land use review board. And I'm forgetting off the top of my head who can appeal that decision. I think it is going to be easier. I mean, certainly easier than 50% of 50% of the towns rejecting it. So there'll definitely be more potential responsiveness there. But it's just important for people to understand this dynamic.
Yeah, absolutely.
And of course, we can hold all of the meeting long. We are a public entity, so it's not like we're doing anything in the shadows. But that's just an important dynamic to understand. Let's see. And then we're to define in our regional plans what constitutes substantial regional impact in order to be given due consideration in state regulatory proceedings. And this is Act 250 and Section 248. I don't think that due consideration, I don't know exactly what that means within the Act 250 context. But, I think it's because they function differently than the Public Utility Commission. So I think for them, that due consideration is more defined. Assist me now, municipalities negotiate their plans, that their plans address projects that may have cross-border substantial regional impacts. So the conservation of energy and development of renewable energy resources, that came out of Act 171. And then out of the Clean Water Initiative, RPC should serve as a clean water service provider. How much more time do I have?
I think you have about half an hour or more.
Okay. So these are optional powers. Those are our duties. These are optional powers. Develop inventory of the regional critical facilities, study and make recommendations on land development, basically development of the region. So we have the ability to make studies and recommendations. Require information of municipalities and state agencies as it relates to the work of the RPC. We can enter upon land with prior approval of the owner to make examinations and surveys. You may say, why would you do that? So one of the things that we've helped get contracts to do is stream geomorphic assessments. And so you might want to get permission. It's easier now with LiDAR, but you might want to get permission of a property owner to go on their property and look and see is there ledge there or not? Retain staff, consultant assistants in carrying out our duties. Undertake comprehensive planning, including preliminary planning, capital investment plans, carry out economic development programs, provide planning training, gather economic and demographic information, assist existing businesses and industry, include in our bylaws. This was added, probably 13 years ago. Acquire and dispose of real property, borrow money and incur debt. And part of the reason for that was some of the RPCs at the time were wanting clear authority to actually own our own buildings because it was going to be cheaper than renting them. It could apply more broadly to that, but it wasn't clear that we could actually own our own offices.
If you incur debt, who are you responsible for paying that debt back?
Right.
And how do you raise the funds to do that?
It would happen through our town assessment. When I get to the funding in just a minute, you'll see more what that looks like, but it would mean basically right through our contracts and other things, it would be, we would have to be able to pay the mortgage
Yeah,
on that. So ultimately, the commission would be responsible. But like I say, I think the legislative intent was to make that necessarily broad, but we're still on the hook for whatever our debts are. But as I recall, back in the day, we were just wanting clear permission to own the buildings we occupy because it could be more efficient than. Right.
Yeah, well, I just think it could be, that could be connected with the building, because if you get a building has extra space, you're in some of it and you rent out the rest of it. So that could be a way to pay back the debt.
Yeah, sure, but I think
That's what,
income, sorry.
yeah. So it doesn't have to be taxed.
I think also part of the deal was just like, if a lender asked, what authority do you have to do this? We needed some legislation.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
Statutory
definitely. Yeah.
authority to do it.
We can act as an escrow agent for municipalities, we can enter into contracts with public and private entities to provide our services, it just makes sense. When this went through, we just need to make clear that we have that authority to do that. And invest funds when not otherwise restricted. The reason for that is sometimes we receive, as opposed to the money just sitting there, it should generate more money for us to provide services. So that would be just for that. And perform other acts or functions as deemed necessary to fulfill the obligations of the chapter. We've already talked about intermunicipal service agreements, so I won't. The main gist of it was several years ago, I think it was 2014, we had reached out to the legislature to see, would you like to establish council of government authority? And there was pushback on that for fear of creeping countyism, I think.
Creeping countyism?
There was a lot of concerns that this was like a backdoor way to create county government.
That we
And-
researched too, so we don't step on the same landmines.
Yeah, honestly, I think part of it was, I don't think the ground was as prepared well enough as it could have been. So I think the world has changed a lot. This was, since that first happened, but, so the settlement where they landed on, okay, let's at least give RPCs the ability to enter in, because previously we didn't have the ability to enter in, we could, like municipalities, if they created a union district or something, they could hire us to do the work, but we couldn't enter into their agreement with them as part of that intermunicipal service agreement. So basically all this said was we can establish, as long as our towns want us to, because they had to support this, we could include in our bylaws, giving ourselves the authority to enter into intermunicipal service agreements. So that was what statute enabled, but it's fairly clunky. And one of the things that notes is funds provided for regional planning under basically the statute that authorizes funding through our performance-based contract with the Agency of Commerce and Community Development to basically support our general doing work, shall not be used to provide services under a service agreement without prior written authorization from the state agency or other entity providing the fund. And the commission shall not use municipal funds or grants provided for regional planning services under this chapter to cover the cost of providing services under any service agreement. So I think we can use the fund to have conversations between towns broadly. Like, would you like to talk about intermunicipal services? But once we start talking about something specific, the way I read the statute, the towns then have to start contributing the funds to have that conversation about what that service might be. So broadly, I can go out as a director and have a meeting with towns saying, hey, what kind of intermunicipal services might you want? But once we start talking about shared animal control services, I think at that point, the towns have to support that wholly themselves. So RPC funding, so our primary source of funding that really just supports our basic operations to do all those duties and optional powers comes from the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. So that supports, that's basically in our region, we call it our core funding. Some call it our base funding. That's our base operational funds to pay staff, pay rent, do those kinds of things. And we have a specific performance-based contract. So we do, as a group, negotiate with the Agency of Commerce and Community Development performance metrics that we're to meet, such as participating in Act 250, participating in Section 248, preparing an annual report. Oftentimes in the legislature, right, like there are things related to Act 181 that we have responsibilities for, that's in that contract. So it's not just a blanket, there are specific things that we're supposed to do. Majority of revenues are tied to contract with specific scopes of work. And typically the way we try to do it is, instead of like each individual RPC negotiating with an agency its own terms, we collectively work with the agency to identify that contract. And in some cases, it makes sense, like with V-Trans, for them to have an individual contract with each of the RPCs. In other cases, one RPC might be the point, like, so for MTAP, Doug's agency contracted with Two Rivers Ottaquechee Regional Commission, and the rest of us were subcontractors under that. That helps the state administer these programs so that so they're managing one contract as opposed to 11.
Yeah.
Then town assessments are small, but for a lot of us, they're going to be like 5, 6, 4% of our total budget. But that is the only funding that we see that we have total control over. And it's really important because that can make the difference really between whether we have, the non-federal match for things, and just other match agreements. So it's not a huge percent of our budget, but it's really important. Towns also hire regional planning commissions to do work on an individual basis, sometimes as a part of an intermunicipal service agreement. So I'll just share with you our profile. So for 2025, our budget of approximately $2.4 million is derived from 56% regional project grant funding. So that's a transportation planning initiative, emergency management planning grant. In some years it'd be things like municipal technical assistance program, municipal energy resilience program, those kinds of things. That's what we refer to as regional project grant funding. 11% town technical assistance funding. These are grants like municipal planning grants that towns get. These are things that, or municipal roads general permit road erosion inventories or bridge and culvert inventories. So basically those are grants, those are agreements we enter into directly with our towns. 28% state performance-based contract funding, that's that grant I was talking about through the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, and 5% from town assessments. And of that total budget, in our case, about $940,000, about 38% is going to be expended on grants like brownfields, cleanup or assessment, or consultant services, where we're actually hiring somebody in addition to staff to do the work. So our baseline funding through ACCD, Sports for General Operations, is generally stable. That's determined through the property transfer tax formula. I won't read all the details here, but it was originally, Act 181 dropped it from, and this is the funding that supports not just regional planning commissions, but also the Vermont Center for Geographic Information and municipal planning grants. Originally, it was 17% of the revenue from the property transfer tax. Act 181 dropped that to 13%. But of course, there's that notwithstanding clause, right? So we've never, maybe a long time ago, we got that full potential percentage, but that's not been the case. For years, for about 20 years, we were level funded. And then I think it was a year before last, 20% increase. We had another substantial increase last couple of years, which was incredibly important and really helped us with our planning initiatives. Through the Transportation Planning Initiative, that's generally stable. Occasionally, we'll get a 2 to 3% annual increase. That requires a 10% non-federal match. Emergency Management Planning Grant, we were level funded from 2017 until 2023, and then last year we received, depending on which RPC, it's based on a formula, a 20 to 30% cut, and that requires a 50% non-federal match. The reason for that cut was Vermont VEM relied, and the legislature relies a lot on funding coming out of FEMA through the Emergency Management Planning Grant funding. So a 10% federal grant translated to a 20 to 30% credit at our level. A lot of our funding is limited term, oftentimes like 12 to 18 months of duration. So while the special project funding is really important to the state to kind of especially reach out and work with to help us engage with towns on whatever the legislative initiative might be, or important for planning at a regional scale, it creates a challenge for us because we can't staff up and staff down. There's not a lot of planners just lurking in the bushes out in Vermont. It's an incredibly competitive environment. And it takes us a lot longer to staff up, in part because of the housing situation too. There's the, do I move across the country to work in Vermont if the funding's not secured and I can't find housing? Now, that's not unique to us, right?
I was gonna say, I've heard
Yeah.
that from pretty much everyone I've talked to.
But that dynamic changed with the pandemic, because it used to be that it was kind of easier for us to pick somebody up. But the main thing I guess I'd leave you with on this is funding drives our work programs rather than the commissions or the commissioners. So really, this is not unique to Vermont. This is, I was just in a meeting on Friday with the Connecticut River Watershed Partnership. Same dynamic in Connecticut, Massachusetts. I know it's the case in New Hampshire. So I think that when the regional commissions were first set up, the idea was there was this money that's going to come through the property transfer tax, and it would go to the regional commissions, and these town-appointed commissioners would decide what the planning agenda was for the region, what the needs were for the towns, and we would pursue that. And that dynamic is very different now.
Is it because the property transfer tax is not withstood every year, or you just don't get that funding anymore, or is it not sufficient?
No, I mean, it's way better than what it was, and it is fairly reliable as long as, and so from my budgeting standpoint, I'm basing my staffing on what that projection looks. By projection, I mean assuming level funding.
Yeah.
And then I have to be really careful, like on these kind of limited term, 15-month things, because I have to think through, can I do this with my existing staff? Can I find a consultant? And the consultants are just hard to get now too.
Yeah.
And this isn't a complaint, I'm just trying to explain, just be real candid about our work dynamic. And so it can be, so sometimes it can be a challenge, like we'll get additional funding coming to us. And it may be hard for us to do that quick turnaround to get the work done in the 12 to 18 months. Because we got to figure out how do we staff it up when our staff are already fully engaged on the other things that we already have on our plate.
Mm-hmm.
So again, not a complaint at all. It's just, the challenge is we don't have the ability, like a consulting firm, but then we could change our rates, right? We could charge more to our clients so that we could, or if we were a county government, we would raise taxes or not, we would be more in that control. So I would say, was it Matt with Connecticut?
Yeah.
He was talking about innovation. This does stifle innovation a bit, because if we had more latitude and kind of less prescribed, like we had funding through the legislature for housing navigators. Y'all didn't tell us what we had to do. You let us figure that out at a regional level. Some RTCs retain technical assistance to help people to develop a plan for accessory apartments. What we did in our region, I think, was pretty cool. I didn't know how it was going to work. We did a 4-town housing charrette, just kind of as an experiment to say, hey, instead of just thinking about, you need hundreds of units in your own town, where can it go, especially when so much of your developable area is floodplain. What if we brought 4 towns together and had them think collectively, like, okay, in our shared geography, where would it make sense to build houses?
That's such a radical idea, Chris.
I know, but and it's not, is it?
You don't know me that well.
No, but that's the thing. That should be easy, but so much of the funding is structured for it's a town by town by town thing. By virtue of the fact that the legislature, for lack of a better term, earmarked this money for us to support housing, they gave us the latitude to figure out what to do with it. Because so many of our agreements are very prescriptive in terms of work product and how we're going to do that work and by when we're going to do it. And, we just don't have that latitude, and so it can kind of squelch innovation. Because one package has to fit all 11 regions and all 250 some odd municipalities. And that's just not the way the state, that's just not the way it would work. So, So ideally, I mean, more is better than less, and having, I would say, more unstructured, not by unstructured, obviously we have to have performance metrics, we have to, be able, we're probably audited more than most any other entity in the state. We have annual audits, and if we hit the criteria, we have what's called a federal single audit, but we can be audited under every single one of these grant agreements that we have, including the town. So I'm not saying just, no holds barred, here's some money, go do groovy stuff. But I do think that if we had more latitude, we could do more really creative, impactful things. And I would just love for us to be able to do more where, like, we talk to our commissioners, we talk to our towns, and we say, what are your priorities for us? And then we pursue those priorities, as opposed to what is the state's priorities for you or the federal priorities for you. I'm not complaining, it's just, but it is, so often I will hear, like, why don't you do this for the towns? Why don't you do that for the towns? And I hate to give them the answers like we're not funded to do it.
Right.
Because I'd rather just say, because now, based on that 4-town housing charrette that we did, what I really want to do is, we have some latitude this year related to Act 181. And what I really want to focus on is, I want to do multi-town charrettes to figure out where is it possible to grow away from flood hazards and fluvial erosion hazards, so that we can identify, like, town and land and other things about how do we grow up and away. What does that mean for the infrastructure investments you would need to make in order to actually do that? And so figure out because right now, I mentioned before, I'm involved in a process where we're mapping where all the wastewater systems are. If you overlay that with a zoning atlas, I think we're going to see a pretty horrifying tale that we're generally supporting development only at high-risk areas, not exclusively, but. And so we really need to do the planning to figure out how do we grow away. And
Right.
part of the country that I'm from, which is Southwest Virginia, Western North Carolina, Northeast Tennessee, we see how much worse it can get. And so we really need to start thinking about when Village X or Downtown Y can no longer exist. At least we've already begun to plan and invest in. We're not necessarily moving the town, but we've got that other area we've already planned to develop.
I'm going to ask you to, I don't know how many more slides you have, but,
I'm about done.
okay.
Again, we have, as mentioned before, we have constrained ability to pursue grants with high non-federal match requirements. Because once we commit money to a match out of our non-federal funds, we've made that commitment. We can't double, triple dip or something. The indirect rates, so one of the challenges we have is that those rules are set by the Office of Management and Budget that we have to follow. VTrans, because that's our largest source of federal funding, that's our cognizant agency, but what we're finding is ANR, VEM, others want to review our indirect rates and say, well, we want this in or we don't want that in it. We can only have one indirect rate, unless you're aware of something.
You should connect them later, because they can't do that.
But what we're trying to do, and we may need a legislative remedy, is just to basically say, RPCs have one cognizant agency and that establishes their indirect rate, because it can slow down for months getting contracts through with state agencies, which then cuts into our town to actually implement the programs. The other challenge we've got are unnecessary RFPs. So you see our duties and powers, but yet sometimes when there's not, like, especially federal funding that requires it, we have to compete for an RFP when it's clear that the legislature is designating us to do the work, because that's what we're supposed to do. So we then have to go through, again, we're taking time to go through an RFP process for us to do the work. And there are cases where, like, it may make more sense for, like, a conservation district to do something as opposed to an RPC. I totally get that. But frequently, they're just these what I think are unnecessary RFPs, where there really is no other competition. And it's our responsibility. It's what the state has already said, the legislature has already said, we're expecting you to do this. So VAPTA, we're going to go on external review right now. Next, we've contracted National Associated Development Organizations Research Foundation to perform external evaluation. They've conducted interviews right now. Municipal select board planning commissions and our commissioners are completing surveys. We expect this will be done by the end of the year, so happy to come back and present that. So summary, our focus is on planning, assisting municipalities and executing state legislative and agency initiatives. We've already gone over most of this. Commissioners serve at the pleasure of the legislative bodies who don't have the authority to speak for the municipality. We have no governing or governance authority beyond our own commission. We talk about the application of regional policy. We're grant dependent, meaning our work programs are largely externally driven. And the temporary nature of our funding limits our ability to grow and retain staffing capacity. I'm going to conclude with, so us compared to county government, right, we have no elected legislative body or elected executive. We have no ability to raise general revenue. We have no ability to enact or enforce laws, policy, regulations, or issue permits. Not saying we should, I'm just saying that's the crib sheet for how are we different than county government. And as opposed to councils of governments, our board members do not speak authoritatively for the town. So you've already heard, right? When the minute somebody gets elected to the highest position in a town in Connecticut, they go to that council of governments. And so our members cannot make spending decisions in collaboration with their respective legislative bodies. And what I've got here, this is the organizational chart for the Franklin Regional Council of Governments immediately to our south in Franklin County, Mass. And again, it's very much like what you saw in Connecticut. You've got the FERCog Council and the Executive Committee, and those are town elected officials on that council. If you notice over to on the other side there, it says Franklin Regional Planning Board. That's ostensibly the RPC. So the RPC is part of the COG. So as we think about this, it's not necessarily that the RPC, I mean, maybe the RPC would become the Council of Governments, but that planning function, just like you saw with Connecticut, would probably become a part of a Council of Governments. It would be like its own division, still doing all that stuff, but then you've got that COG that really helps do the municipal shared service type of work.
Mhm.
So that's it.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, go ahead.
Why is the executive, what is the meaning of it being read around the executive director?
That executive director oversees all,
Okay,
both sides of that.
got it, thank you.
All right, are there other questions for Chris at this point? You did identify a few things that at least I heard that are for possible consideration of tweaks that we could do sooner rather than later, potentially, if there's agreement, obviously. And then longer term kind of considerations as we're looking at the big picture and the scope of our work. And when you said that you're undergoing the review, is that all RPCs or just your?
That's all of us collectively. And we actually, that's in Act 181. Right, or actually, it's one of the recently passed acts.
And when is that happening?
It's happening now, so the draft will come out in November. The final is going to be done by the end of the year.
Oh,
And
well,
so,
we gotta make sure we get that.
And then so we can get it to you on that. I would imagine that this is important. We could probably even get someone from NATO, the entity doing the work, to do a presentation to you.
Yeah, maybe at our December meeting. Would that be too soon?
When is it?
December
That
11th.
may be too, I just don't know
Okay.
when the final product's come. It may have to be after you get, I think you said you're not going to meet necessarily during the legislative session, but it may be. You certainly deliver the report to you as soon as you
Yeah.
know.
We haven't decided how we're gonna handle things, and we might meet once or twice during the session, but only if we can find a time that we could all come, maybe a Monday or something. I say this
Yes.
where people are looking at me with darts. But heck, maybe none of us will be here.
We'll get it to you regardless. I just can't commit to the December 11th date because I don't know. If
Yeah, but obviously that is something that I think is relevant to our work. And, okay, are there other questions for Chris or comments? All right, you can stay there if you want, because I think at this point, we're gonna, Doug, did you have more to say about that memo or more to say just in general? Because this was your time at this point.
Not too much more, Madam Chair.
Okay. Go ahead.
I think mostly just wanted to provide the memo just as another kind of link in the chain and just for awareness of the committee. an opportunity also to talk about the report that was filed on September 16th by Interim Secretary Clark. And that was, under Act 118, so the act that established this committee. And the main ground that we covered in that, it really documented what I testified on kind of informally in August, I believe, and some slight updates to that. So federal funding opportunities, we did explore, of course, FEMA, and as Chris said, FEMA's funding has moved in the opposite direction of being helpful for our current situation, generally about 10% down. So no opportunities there really. We did explore quite a bit with the Economic Development Authority, but just like a lot of conversations and talking about different groups, anything we did under that would have to be really stovepiped into economic development, and that's not helpful. I don't think that aligns with the charge of the committee really, to produce some research that's really, blinders on looking at economic development. Economic development districts are very helpful and they're good things to do, but that'd be a little bit of tail wagging the dog. Potential avenues for additional funding. The slight change in this aspect is always tough to say this out loud without sounding crass. The massive disaster across multiple states in the South has now made it much more likely that Vermont will receive a disaster supplemental. That's just the political calculus.
Much more unlikely.
Much more likely that we will receive a disaster supplemental. So, because before we had Hawaii and California and Vermont, all blue states, massive loss of life in Hawaii, which most people seem to have forgotten about already. Billions of dollars in property damage in California. Rest of the country doesn't care that much about that. I'm sorry, I'm being very blunt. But this hurricane that swept across the South impacted a lot of red states and kind of brought the national scales into battle as far as which political party impacted states were part of. So I think it's likely that before the end of the year, we will see more serious. Our delegation has been fighting since the day after the flood for us to get a supplemental. But I do believe they'll get more traction now. And that just like after Sandy, we did not get a supplemental from Irene until after Hurricane Sandy, which did impact New York and New Jersey very significantly, but also came up the coast and impacted a lot of other states. So the political calculus is there for us to get a disaster supplemental. And we were able to deploy funds after Irene very quickly once we had that supplemental. The biggest thing about those is that they tend to have some general purpose money. Community development, block grant, disaster relief funds are easy to deploy strategically. You don't have carte blanche, similar to what Chris said about, you get guardrails, but they are much wider than the traditional federal programs, much, much wider. So it's possible that that can be used to augment or fund some of the research in this area or thinking in this area. So it's horrible, but the recent disasters will make it more likely Vermont will go into next year with more federal resources available to us. Also makes it less likely that FEMA's standard funding will get reduced again next year.
Right. Well, we should continue to talk about that as we work things out with the scope of work, and what that might entail and how much money that might cost. And if there are other entities that you or anybody else think we should pursue? Michael gone, I see. If you want to turn on your cameras and be part of this conversation too, in terms of the consulting work that we might want to do. Or is going, moving ahead with at least a draft that we can review about for the UVM work. Is that sufficient, or do we want to look at other options?
Personally, I think the UVM opportunity is the biggest one we have in front of us right now.
Yeah.
Nothing is likely to happen before, the election and the dust settles from that. So
yeah,
we'll probably see something in December at the federal level.
Okay. Michael, you had mentioned some other national organization. I don't know if you've been in touch talking with them or not, but.
Yeah, it was GFOA. And I did talk with them, and I think they're interested. I think the question becomes like, what is their part of this scope? So given kind of the time frame we have on this, I mean, a lot of the groundwork, a lot of the sort of more political science questions, I think, would be answered by the UVM study, and then like specific funding and financing issues might be secondary. So I see them as being supplementary to whatever work. If you had some specific questions in mind, I'm happy to engage them to to meet offline. But
What is GFOA again? What does it
yeah,
stand for?
sorry, Government Finance Officers Association. So
Okay.
they have they do sort of consulting work and various engagements with their member communities.
Okay. That's helpful, because when I was talking to JFO, to Catherine Benham about this, I couldn't remember the name of the organization. I was like, I know it has something to do with finance and government, but I'm gonna guess that she's aware of the work that they do as well, so I can mention that to her.
I would think so.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, Rep.
Yeah, we haven't mentioned it yet, but I know we were reached out by the 14 conservation districts, natural resources.
Yes, in fact, they had a representative in the room. Oh, here we go. Hi, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Gio Rachi, I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont Association of Conservation Districts. And my colleague was here this morning.
Right, yes, we swapped
From the
out.
State Natural Resources Conservation Council. So we have two different entities. The State Natural Resources Conservation Council is technically a state agency, and VACB is a nonprofit association. And we both work on behalf of conservation districts. We'd love the opportunity to come in and present about sort of our role in this scheme of things, and our thoughts about some of the questions you're asking, which are excellent. I'm hearing some common themes with the RBCs. Chris, I'm appreciating your testimony.
Yeah, excellent. Well, thank you for engaging and reaching out to us. And I believe you're gonna join the TAG, the Technical Advisory Group, or some rep from your group.
Yes.
Yeah, that will be helpful.
And we'd be happy, I don't know if you can fit us in and what you've got planned before the session, and we'd love to give a presentation, something like the RBCs did.
Okay. Yeah, we're gonna talk a little bit right now about our plans for next meeting. So, yeah, I'm not sure if we're gonna have time next meeting, but we can talk about that and what the committee wants to do. Senator Harrison.
I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to ask a question of Mr. Farnham before we
Yeah, go ahead.
leave this. The Economic Development Authority planning grant, has that opportunity passed? Because I have seen water systems and wastewater systems be considered economic development.
Yeah, so there is still some disaster supplemental funding from the EDA is deploying. We do have one application that we're working on with them for regional coordinator, for I think 2 to 3 regional coordinators, similar to what Pat Moulton is doing for Central Vermont. I think, especially if we're talking about, the next federal year of funding, we could continue to explore it, but I think when I talked to Catherine Trapani at EDA, it was pretty clear that we could only stretch it so far. And that we would also have to come up, if we wanted to stretch the scope farther, then EDA would have to cover a smaller slice of the total cost. So if we create a more complicated funding stack to where they're only covering 25% of the cost or something like that, then they can sign off on a broader scope. I know Chris has done this dance with them before too. So it's not outside the realm of possibility. The funds are still available, but I think we've been working on this one grant application with them for about 9 months. And I think if we're talking about them only committing, less than $100,000 or something, the amount of time it would take to get the money might be more expensive.
I was thinking more dollars.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, we
Run into
can
that
see.
scope issue. I think
I think maybe we'll continue to have this conversation with you offline with with JFO as well, and and UVM, and how much money we might need. I'd like to turn now, we only have like 16 minutes left, about for next meeting, what we want to do. And then as Chris was bringing up a couple of things that seemed like short-term, sort of temporary tweaks that we could make. I'm interested in, I know I've gotten several emails from people who are like, you can't wait a year, especially after Mike and I were quoted in the paper saying like, nothing's going to happen fast. People were like, what do you mean nothing's going to happen fast? So I don't know if there are things, I think for our next meeting, having the committee identify some things that aren't like the official final recommendations, but maybe little tweaks that we could think about for next session, for whoever's coming back next session. And then as we continue the long-term work, I think that would be a helpful conversation to have in December. And then we had talked about doing the public safety stuff. And thinking about that, there are a couple other study committees that are working on public safety related things. And I was thinking maybe of asking them to come and present to us. So we get a report from the dispatch committee, we get a report from the EMS committee, and then there's a third one there's another ongoing committee that's related to public safety. Does anyone remember it? I thought there were 3.
Are you thinking about the council or the emergency, the planning to the
EMS?
Yeah, so EMS council was one.
The EMS
Public Safety
council.
Communication Task Force is two.
I thought there was a third one, but maybe not. So having those two come in and give us an update, and
We did make changes to, so I was thinking about the membership and duties of the, state emergency planning folks, but like that's not like a study committee,
no, that's
That
the
might be
state
what we're doing.
emergency. Yeah, maybe we should have VEM come in and give us an update. We could ask them to come in. Anyone else? We had talked about maybe the sheriffs.
Yeah.
Sheriffs make sense.
I want to have, so your sheriff is piloting a regional public safety model.
Mhm.
And I'd like to hear how that's going. I think-
Yeah, and it's, right now it's in development, but yes,
Yeah.
I think that would be great to have.
Okay, so that, just
Sheriff
having those
Anderson.
4 presentations is going to be a lot. So are there other, and then maybe the sort of next session and plus I see Mike writing this down too.
I'll try to take the best notes I can.
Yeah, I'm writing it down so that you can save us in December about, this is what you said you were going to do. We'll have to have a conversation and a presentation or whatever about the potential draft contract or whatever with UVM if we're going to hire them. So the UVM scope of work agreement.
Meeting in November?
No, okay.
No, we don't.
So December
Given-
11th is next
Given the
one, right?
holidays and the election, we skip that month. Yeah.
Another group I think that's been overlooked and not talked about too much, and I've already started an effort already, is reaching out to my town clerks as well as select board members. I think it's important, as Chris said, they talked about, county government creep before, and I think they would consider that again. So I think it's important to hear what their main concerns are in the small towns and what they maybe think of this particular, it's hard to understand it at this point, but I think it's important to have their input. And I don't know how to do that. A lot of my small towns, some people are pretty shy, but of course, the select board member from Lunenburg, as you remember, on the
Not shy.
ethics bill is not shy. So I'm
Believe
sure
me,
we-
they're not actually shy.
But again, so I've actually started to reach out and I'm going to send out to each of my towns, maybe a little questionnaire, but maybe that would be good for others to do as well. But again, I think it does make a difference. You talk about rural. I think there is a big difference between what some people are calling rural and what really is rural. So I think it's important to hear, again, what their actual concerns are, what they're dealing with on the ground, and maybe ways that they would suggest that could help.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, the survey, I don't think we individually have to do that survey. I mean, you can do it if you want to, but I think that's part of what might be in the scope of work for the UVM crew to do is a survey collecting data about what's working and what's not working and what are the suggestions, and what are the pressure points for the municipalities. So I think we got to remember that we have, I think, 10 meetings that were authorized, and this is our this is our third one. So we'll have one more, and then we're going to take a pause, and then we'll have 6 more after the session before we finalize, and we can undoubtedly, if we feel like we need more, get a couple more meetings if we want to. So I'm wondering if it might be a good idea to focus on this sort of public safety next time. And then when we ask the TAG and the UVM group, assuming that's who we go with, to do some of that groundwork. And then we have the LCT and the Clerks and Treasurers Association and the other local government associations. The county, I think the county assistant judges have an association that's also on the TAG. And trying to think of who else that we put on there, and have those come in, those associations all come in when we regroup after the session, or if we decide to meet during the session, have them come in. So we have a whole meeting dedicated to that conversation. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
Makes sense to me. It does make sense to.
Okay.
Can I offer one suggestion just for eventually?
Sure.
I would encourage you to have Franklin Regional Council of Governments at some point, because that's a rural cog.
That's the Massachusetts?
Yeah, they look a lot like Vermont. I mean, it's the biggest town, I think, is, Northampton, but then you've got all the small, like our border towns, really small, limited capacity. I just think it may be easier for you to answer a few questions, like what, at a rural scale, what are they providing? Maybe a little easier to wrap your head around than like the capital area.
Yeah, maybe when we hear from the VLCT and those guys.
I'm happy to make that connection.
Yeah, that would be good if you can keep that in your back pocket and remind us that we were going to do that. Mike, in terms of Michael, sorry. In terms of the technical advisory group, I know you have a meeting next week, I believe, on the 31st. And one sort of thing that I was asked is if you could create a list of everyone who is the designated member to the TAG from each organization. So, Michael Gahn from the Bond Bank, and then your contact, like email, however you want to officially be contacted. I've had a request that kind of document be included on our website, because our membership is included on there, and you can just click and email any one of us, but there's not a list of who's officially on the technical advisory group, and several people have asked me for that. I forgot to mention it to Mike Ferrant too. So I don't think we should post them in the same way that we're posted, because they're not technically part of this committee, but having a document that we could put in the featured documents section of our website with everybody on it, that would be helpful.
Yeah, I think I'm just pulling it up here, bear with me. I've got that organized pretty well. There's one organization, Vermont Association of County Judges. I don't have a representative from that organization to date, but
Okay.
everybody else I can this will be very easy to put together.
Okay. And I can give you a couple names for the Association of County Judges, the people who came in and testified to us, to the GovOps committees.
Okay.
That I'm sorry, I didn't know they hadn't responded yet. So they should have somebody on it because they're definitely.
And I can go back. It might have just been they didn't attend the first meeting, and that's why I don't have them on there. But yeah, it'd probably be just helpful to have your suggestions.
Well, whenever you have a final list that you feel like everybody's okay with, especially putting out their names and email addresses, that if you could send that to Mike Ferrant to post.
Okay.
That would be helpful. And then
Yep. I think you're going to answer my next question. So
about what you all should be doing. So I think that if you are talking about, if we're talking about public safety next time, if you have a conversation about public safety and really dig into that next time, and then you can come to us with whatever. Does this make sense? Or how do you think we should best use the technical advisory group? Yeah.
I think what you suggested before of the tweaks that we can do this session is a great idea to have in December. And if they could suggest tweaks.
That's a good idea. Okay. So I guess one thing that would be, if there's something specific to public safety you want us to hear, besides what we just mentioned. And then second, if you all can brainstorm some possible tweaks. And that's just sort of like the thing that Chris mentioned that I was like, oh, why did that come up last year about giving RPCs the authority or the responsibility to do the planning so that they don't have to, that seems like a small, easy thing that we could do that might make your life easier. But maybe not. Maybe there's pushback and we can't end up doing it. I don't know all the details, but
it's worth hearing.
Yeah, so those two things for your next meeting, does that make sense, you guys? Anyone else have any ideas for the technical? Because this is the group that has all the stakeholders, including the towns on it. So, it has VLCT and the Clerks Association and everything on it.
Conservation District will be on that now.
Conservation districts are on it now, and RPCs are on it, and frankly, anybody who wants to be on it can be on it, but.
Are state agencies on it? Can they be on it? Well, I'm thinking about the water and wastewater folks in DEC, that unit. They have a lot of understanding.
Water Investment Division?
Yes. Is that water and wastewater? Is it?
So, the bond bank works with them as well. The Clean Water and Drinking Water, SRF.
Yes.
That's generally out of either the engineering side or the program management is on the Water Investment Division side.
Right.
They're mostly local and regional entities that are on it, not state agencies.
Right. Well, that's just a big responsibility, and it's a very impactful program.
When Senator Harrison, we did add Vermont Rural Water to the list here at my recommendation last time. So between the bond bank and Vermont Rural Water, we'd be covering that area pretty well, I think.
Okay. So there might be tweaks in that process or legislative tweaks that could be helpful.
I'm happy to reach out to them.
All right. Does that give you enough direction for what we are interested in from you? And then you can report back to us at our next meeting?
Yeah. And I think maybe that even provides a little bit of time for a kind of an open forum. So there might be some other things to come out of that too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to try to make it to that meeting, and you can talk, you and Mike and I can talk about that after. Okay. Anything else? Doug.
To Senator Harrison's question earlier, with the UVM statement of work, when it's ready, I will be happy to bring it back to the federal partners, because actually in October, or actually late September, early October, the interagency recovery team was restarted for the disasters that happened this year. So we do have access to that federal team, and I can
Basically, if I have a statement of work, I can bring it to them and say, can any of you fund part or all of this, like, right?
Oh, cool, okay.
So that'll give me another chance to ask for money from them.
We're meeting with them, I think, next week. So then I should have at least a draft that we can share with you.
Okay.
Okay, cool. All right, thank you, everyone.